Hello, I'm Jenya DeLima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the author focused podcast that takes a whole person approach to everything related to both writing and editing. Friendship is meant to bond two people together, to bring them closer into one another's lives, and to provide companionship and support. But what happens when a friendship turns toxic or even dangerous? And why might one friend turn on the other? Author Robin Merle explored those questions in her book, A Dangerous Question or A Dangerous Friendship, and is here to share her answers. Thank you so much for being here today, Robin.
Thank you for having me. This will be fun and exciting.
Yes. Were you inspired at all by any real life friendships you were a part of or had observed?
Actually, I was inspired by every friendship that I've ever been in or witnessed since high school. We all know the archetypes of the mean girls, the
Mhm.
popular girls, but we really don't know about the quietly dangerous ones. And I have seen friendships where there's an imbalance of power, let's say, that's not easily identifiable in the beginning. And sometimes those friendships end quickly. And sometimes, like in the book, they start to spiral out of control. And you really get a sense of both why the women are together and how they feed off of one another and how they should protect each other from one another.
Why do you think that we sometimes find ourselves in friendships like this that feel all consuming in the beginning?
Well, I think we are naturally attracted to people who have large lives and will take large risks. I mean, we have an
Mhm.
obsession with celebrities, we have an obsession with prominent people. And when someone like that comes into your own orbit, and you say, oh my gosh, how did she achieve that? Or I can't believe that she went out and summited in, 2 hours or something that's really, it's both inspiring and appeals to our sense of thrill and our sense that, yeah, I want to do that too. I want to be that person. How do you be that person? And so some of us feel lucky. I don't know if you remember these experiences of when you admired somebody from afar, another girl, let's say in high school, and you got to know them. For whatever reason, they reached out to you and you were like, oh my gosh, now I can find out about that life.
Right, and you feel
And
so special that you've been
you do.
selected. Yes.
You do, yes. And then you just continue on. And sometimes, well, what happens in this story, you miss a lot of the red, often maroon flags along the way.
Yes, you do. So, talking about people who are larger than life and have these
Yes.
stories, let's move into talking about Spike and Tina and which one of
Okay.
them fits that description.
Well, Spike clearly is the one that's larger than life, the provocateur, glamorous, seems to have story after story about being with wealthy men
Mhm.
and understanding how that upper crust society works and how she navigates it. What I find interesting is that her stories are so far-fetched, yet when we see her in action, it's clear. People are drawn to her like she's a
Mhm.
magnet.
Yeah, no one
And it's
questions
clear.
anything she's saying at all.
No, no. And she actually does have that strong and often volatile charisma that makes people want to know more and be
Mhm.
around her.
Yeah, I was thinking even about their dialogue in the book. Spike has
Mhm,
paragraph after paragraph, and you can tell that not
mhm.
just Tina, but everyone else there is completely enraptured. Whereas with Tina, you might see a line or two. And then in contrast to, and this isn't spoiling anything, there's something about a man shopping at Bergdorf's and his friends and how
Yeah.
she's saying, I can't even afford this. I've never been there. And then you have Spike, who's sharing all these very cosmopolitan stories and seems to live, like you said, this celebrity lifestyle of
Hmm. Hmm.
men gravitating to her instead of her trying to chase one down or get the
Right.
attention of one. So, what then do you think it is specifically about both Spike and Tina that draws them together?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to thank you for your editor's viewpoint because the I love the way that you chunked out the paragraph by paragraph that Spike has as if she's on
Yes.
center stage, right? And everybody else is an audience. So
Yes.
thank you. That I never saw that, but I,
Oh my
I
goodness.
really appreciate that. Thank you. Um, so your question was what draws them together?
Right. What is it that the other sees? What is it that each one of them sees in the other that they find compelling or interesting?
Well, we've talked about what Tina sees in Spike,
Mm-hmm.
right? The marquee, billboard type life. And I think what Spike sees in Tina are two things. One, somebody she can teach, somebody she can help, because if you recall, Tina is always self-effacing
Mm-hmm.
and she has just come out of a marriage and feels lost and has no identity. Yet she shows aspects of strength and wit and understanding. And I think Spike enjoys the verbal boxing that goes on between them. But there's also a common thread of look what's happened to us in relationships with men,
Oh yeah.
right? We trusted, we were involved with them, it didn't work. How do we rebuild ourselves? So I'm always fascinated by stories about women and their search for identity after a loss.
Right.
And it prompted my first book, and it's throughout this second book is okay, how far do you go to find out who you are? And do you do that in comparison to someone who's absolutely different from you?
Tina even says that a few times. She mentions the descent repeatedly. Like
Yes,
she talks
yes.
about the shape of the egg, and now she's at the bottom of
Thank
the
you
egg
for
and needs
bringing
to
that
work
up.
her way. Right. And so, do you think too that she's seeing Spike as being, let's say, at the top of her egg and she's down here and trying to figure out a way to get back up to this? That it's more about not just admiration, but what she craves for herself or wishes she could have?
I love that question. At the top of the egg, Spike is not there. That's, when Tina had a sense of who she was.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always say, okay, we start out at the top and we kind of know who we are and we go about our rituals and our routines, and there's no challenges to that. And Spike is somewhere on that journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably as she descends to the bottom of the egg. And Spike is along with her when she gets to the very bottom of it. It's where they're very much entwined,
Mm-hmm.
even when Spike is acting strangely and
Yes.
exploding and not being somebody who seems like a good friend but somebody who wants more than what she's getting. And then the idea is that Tina travels up on the other side of the egg, shedding all of that stuff
Mm-hmm.
but keeping enough not to be cliched but to be a little bit reborn, which is why I chose the egg to begin with as a symbol of what we go through in life. And I really do believe that we all have so many different experiences where we try on different identities, even though we might not describe it that way to ourselves. And then as we go through life and we get older, we realize, oh, look at this. I'm right back where I started, but I'm so much wiser and I'm so much settled in myself.
Yeah, I really love that because it makes me think about that honesty we have when we're really, really young about who we are and what
Right.
we want. And
Exactly.
then we cave to peer pressure or societal
Mhm.
pressures or cultural pressures, and we adapt and assimilate, even if it might not be what we want. But we can even trick ourselves into thinking, no, this is what I want. But there's still that underlying unhappiness or that feeling of discontent, right? Until you, again, are right back at the top of the egg.
Right, right. I love that because it really does try to go back to that innocence that we felt before everybody told us what to think.
Yeah,
I
it's like a
have
purity
this
of self.
exactly a purity of self. Before anybody told you what to think, you knew what to think.
Well, moving back to Spike and Tina, Tina uses words to describe her like spellbound and enthralled. But do you think that Tina would have felt this way if she was in a different part of her life?
I think in this part of her life, she was especially vulnerable to that kind of relationship. And had she been in a different part of her life where there was, let's say, some solid anchors, I don't think she would have been as susceptible and she would not have been the searcher that
Mm-hmm.
she was. I mean, the book starts out where she says, I was at
Mm-hmm.
the end of a series of losses.
Yes.
And I hope you appreciate this as an editor. And I needed someone to talk to me directly. No BS. I really wanted to figure things out. And then I just realized I had to go and explore lives and experiences that were different from what I had known, she thinks. And that's what she does with the
Right.
culmination of a huge journey and experience with Spike. Yeah.
Mhm. Tina also tells Spike early on, you can tell within the first few minutes if someone is going to be in your life. And there's a lot of foreshadowing throughout the book, but this line is one that really struck me. So I'd love to have you share with us what that tells us about Tina's character, but also other ways you used foreshadowing.
So, first, let me ask you, does that resonate with you? Has that happened to you that you
Yes,
could
but
tell?
with both positive and negative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The foreshadowing happens on many different levels. So, for example, what I just had mentioned to you about her saying she wants somebody to speak to her directly. And then later on in the book, there's this whole discussion about not having the right dictionary.
Hmm.
Right. And then throughout the book, there's a theme of storytelling, what's true and what's not, and
Yeah.
how we use words to fool ourselves or not fool ourselves. I like to carry that and pepper it throughout, not once, but throughout.
Hmm.
So Spike, another thing is she says in kind of in that same conversation that did you ever have a sense that fate has a sixth sense of humor?
Yes.
And then those things sort of evolve and show up
Yeah.
later in the story, including all of the things that she says, whether they're real or imagined, about what happened to her as a child. And then she ends up with a car that she nicknames for her father, who was very
Hmm.
troublesome to her in her childhood. So there's a lot of that, I think.
Yeah. She does tell on herself a bit, and I think you don't realize it until you've finished. But even if you could explain how she does this with her writing that she shares.
Right. She has some really, what are to Tina, horrific stories, sort of reliving and reenacting what may have happened to her
Hmm.
in her childhood. And one of my favorite things, because I still get a kick out of some of these lines, is is when Tina discovers a horrible story
Hmm.
that repeats what had happened to her, but in a fictionalized version. She said, well, she doesn't really think that way, right? I mean, that's just a character she inhabits that thinks that way. In other words, the compartmentalization of
Right.
the
Yes.
writer and the person and the friend that I think I know.
Yeah. I want to talk too about this journey that they have between friends where everything seems to be going well and why you needed to establish that, and then into those cracks that form and how you
Okay.
accomplished that.
Okay. Probably like borrowing from what really happens in life, and that usually when two people get together, two women, two men, men and women, when two people get together and they're really sort of taken with one another, their world is narrow.
Hmm.
Right? They talk all the time, they're with each other, they have a common language, they have jokes and all that stuff. The cracks start to show when they go out into the world and other people come into that sphere and they have different responses
Hmm.
to those people, and those people can start to either bring the original relationship closer or tear it apart. And there's when men start to come in, and I think Spike sits Tina down and says, I need to have a conversation with you that I have with all of my friends about how men can come between a woman's friendship with another woman. And those sorts of things happen. So they actively happen and they actively address them a lot of the times in the book about what's happening. So they live it and they talk about it, and then it just gets worse.
And we do see their world becoming narrower and narrower in, I want to say, the first 20% or so. So is that a strategy that you knew you were employing, or was it something that just occurred as you were writing?
I mean, in hindsight, I can say that I knew or planned a lot of things, but in actuality, I write to find out what the story is, how these two
Mm.
characters are going to behave. And then I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite to make sure that it has logic, narrative logic.
Yeah. And then also, how did you make it believable that Tina would want to be friends with Spike, even though we, the reader, might see some of those red flags early on? So, for instance, I did find myself questioning Spike a little bit about who really has all these grandiose stories of a life well lived and being so desired and so popular and so on and so forth. And yet, Tina never questions that, at least not early on when she's first enthralled with her.
I think, Tina's desire to leave the life she knew is so large that at her most vulnerable, she's willing to believe. She's willing to suspend belief and say, this person can guide me out of my world into a much larger world where my everyday silly troubles
Mm,
don't keep me up at night. There's a whole thing about how Tina doesn't have very much money, right? And
right.
she counts her pennies, but the idea that Spike could be, what do we say? She has a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. I mean, that's the way we
Yes.
talk about it now. And she just goes, up and down. And it's never really directly said that these are bouts of mania, that this is a
Mhm.
manic depressive cycle, right? That she goes through. But I could understand it from Tina's vulnerability.
Yeah. So let's talk about the setting then a little bit, since this is set in
Mhm.
the 80s. How would the story have been different than if this had been set, let's say, in a contemporary time period or setting? Do you think that maybe people would have been able to recognize what was happening and maybe been able to take a step back and look at it through that perspective instead?
It would have been a different story. There were no cell phones
Right?
back then, right? It was much easier to find yourself in a silo
Hmm.
and not, people weren't texting each other. Oh, look what she said. Oh, what do you think about this? No one had that ability to do that. So it would have been a very different story and how it unfolded. And there would have been a lot more analytical opinions rushing in about, are you serious? Do you really think this is true? That's,
Hmm.
why are you hanging out with this person? That sort of thing.
Yeah, even just the ease of communicating with other people and being able to
Mhm.
share these stories immediately after they've happened,
Right.
rather than trying to rely upon your own memory and tell them days or even weeks later when now they're spotty and you might question yourself, is that really what she said? Or is that only what I think I remember her saying? So then maybe
That's
you
right.
don't tell the story at all, or you give a greatly condensed version, which no longer sounds unbelievable.
That's very true. That's very smart. Yeah, that's right. Hmm.
Well, looking again at setting, what went into deciding where and when the story was going to take place?
So I actually wrote this over 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I did. And I put it on the shelf. I had agents and publishers and all that stuff, but I put it on the shelf because I needed to work and and
Uh,
support my family, right? And I kept revising along the way. And my husband finally, he said, "You've got to get that out there. You've got to publish that." So at that time, I had started living in New York during that time. And I still love New York City. I just loved it. And at that time, the 80s, things were so vibrant. It was the go-go 80s. Anything was possible. There was a lot of money flying around. All the stuff that Spike says that she's experienced
Mhm.
was true during that time. There was also, during that time, a second wave of feminism, which is undergirds a lot of their discussion about men versus women and why does a
Mhm.
man tell me I can't do this? I can do this, and I want to be my own person. And you wouldn't know this probably, but they tried to pass the Equal Rights Amendment during that time, and it failed. It
Oh,
failed. So there was a lot of that swirling around. It was the beginning of women's studies programs where people were reading and writing books about women and studying them. I mean, more, in an
right.
academic way. So the setting is really important. And I think that, to reflect also on your other question, I don't think it could take place in a different time period. No, not the same way, definitely.
No, I'm glad you brought that up about the second wave of feminism because thinking back, I can see it a little bit even in some of their conversations because
Mhm.
a lot of the areas where they're talking about who they're dating, not necessarily when they're interacting with groups of men or a man one on one in a social or public setting. But Spike is very much don't settle for someone, don't date someone just to date someone. And then you see Tina start to question, well, why am I with this person? Especially earlier on with the older man. Yeah, and it just very much has that tone of you shouldn't have a man in your life just to have a man in your life. What is he offering you? What is he doing for you? How is your life better as a result of him being in it? And I don't think that's something a lot of us maybe think about when we think about the 80s.
That's true. And you're spot on. There is woven throughout a lot of that kind of conversation and a real reflection of the confusion of that time because, Spike will talk tough about
Mhm.
being her own person and not letting a man tell her what to do. At the same time, she actively seeks these wealthy men
Yes.
to elevate her to a different status. But in her mind, and the way she gets Tina to think about it is that we're just using them. The
Hmm.
same way that men would use women, we're just using them. But now we have the power, no matter who they are. So there is quite a lot woven into their conversations.
Yes, and so it did feel very modern to me, even
Mm.
40 years later or however far ahead we are now. And that surprised me a little bit, but it also felt very real to that time period too. Like you said, her language of we're using them, the way they're
Yes.
using us, you could see why somebody would feel that way or take that spin, or why she would see it as a means to an end, and that it's really a fair scenario for both of them. You're getting what I want, and so am I.
Right, right, exactly. And they are bonded by that. I mean, they
Hmm.
come together in that way. Because remember, Tina has been betrayed or lost a husband that she thought would help her build a life, and that didn't happen. So it's like, okay, well, how do I do this by myself? Or how do I use men to help me
Hmm.
do that? And it is kind of subtle in there. There was a book called The Way of All Women, and it and when I looked at I mean it's more recent than you would think, and it says terrible things about how women should behave in relationships. And it's like, and even when I would go back further to other books, because I read a lot about this, it just boggles your mind that these things would be thought of as the way to lead your life.
Mm. Well, we've talked about how you established their bond, but then how did you portray their friendship shifting into something darker?
Again, it really came down to the experiences they had and the relationships that they had with other people. And mostly there's a lot of men that come and go in this book. And they're all types. And they're
Yes.
funny.
That also kind of goes along with the whole undercurrent because, yes, the women don't feel like archetypes at all, but the men mostly do.
Right, right. They're kind of like, okay. And so as they go out and I mean, it really kind of kicks off when they discovered the Starlight, the nightclub,
Mhm.
that turns out to be an all-night festival of dancing and drinking and letting go. And as those experiences pile up, you begin to see that they're both drawn to doing more and more, darker and darker, getting into the bowels of this town where they are and getting to know people. And some of it is just they're having a blast. And then, things turn and they start to accuse each other of things. And, we've been there. It's like a it's like a long-term relationship that unravels
Oh my
at
gosh,
warp
yes.
speed, right?
And I've heard people say that, well, for some of them, that when they've lost a female friendship like that or something similar has happened, but obviously not on the same scale, that it was just as crushing to them or more than losing a romantic relationship. But
Yeah,
we also don't see it portrayed that often unless it's something really sinister, like a psychological thriller.
it's true. That's very true because I'm reading a book now, which is a thriller more on the crime side of the relationship, but we don't see it a lot. We don't, you know.
Yeah, and yet it's a big part of our lives.
It is. It is. Like I said, I've these friendships that happen. I mean, it's really from elementary school on, but we're super aware of friendship and
Hmm.
peer pressure starting in at least, high school or the levels below that. And I mean, that's why Mean Girls is a popular movie.
Right. It still is. Yes.
And it still is. And it has a remake and it's a musical and it keeps going on and on.
Well, and then for our last question, in what ways does the story have changed if it had been in Spike's perspective?
Oh boy, what a neat question. I really have to think about that because I think we would have learned a lot more about Spike the human
Mm.
rather than Spike the idea,
Ah, yes.
right? And so I think it would have been more sad,
Yeah, yeah.
you know. Oh, I love that question.
Well,
I,
thank
I was
you.
It's funny. I was just asked to write an article for Books by Women with an author interviewing a character, and I interviewed Tina, and it was funny, but and Spike came into it, but no, I'm gonna take a gander at doing what you said,
Oh my
and
goodness. If you do, please
yeah,
send me the link.
I will, I will. I love that question.
Well, thank you again so much for this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a delight.
And thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the show notes for more information about today's episode. And if you'd like to hear more conversations like this one, please don't forget to subscribe to the show. Thanks again.